Before America became a nation, it was a collection of colonies on the edge of an empire. In Boston, daily life and imperial power stood face to face. Across the Atlantic, British officials saw the colonies as subjects of an expensive empire. In the colonies, taxes became more than money. They became a question of liberty. Arguments that began in taverns would soon shake the world. Ports became battlegrounds of trade, protest, and imperial control. Politics entered the home through newspapers, rumors, and fear. Ordinary farmers began to train as militia. Two visions were forming: obedience to empire or rights beyond empire. This is the story of how rebellion became revolution. After the 7 Years' War, Britain faced a mountain of debt. The Stamp Act made colonists pay taxes on paper, contracts, newspapers, and legal documents.
To many colonists, taxation without representation felt like political slavery.
Colonial assemblies insisted that rights came from law, not permission.
Britain sent troops to restore order, but their presence deepened resentment.
When fear and anger met in the street, violence became possible.
The Boston Massacre became a symbol far larger than the event itself.
Printers turned memory into politics. Then came the protest that shocked the empire: the Boston Tea Party. It was theatrical, illegal, and impossible for Britain to ignore. Britain answered Boston with punishment. The port was closed, and an entire city felt the pressure. Punishment aimed at rebels also hurt ordinary families. But punishment did something Britain did not expect. It united the colonies. Representatives gathered in Philadelphia to decide how far resistance should go. Most did not yet demand independence. They demanded respect for their rights. While politicians argued, militia companies prepared. They were not professional soldiers. They were neighbors with muskets. British commanders believed a show of force could end the rebellion early. On one April night, warnings rode through the darkness. The message was simple: British troops were moving. British regulars marched toward Concord to seize colonial military supplies. At Lexington, local militia stood on the village green. No one knows with certainty who fired first. But a shot rang out, and history changed direction. At Concord, the countryside itself began to resist. At the North Bridge, militia fired back at Imperial troops. The British retreat became a running battle through the countryside. For civilians, revolution arrived with the sound of muskets beyond the fields. By nightfall, the Empire had learned that the rebellion could fight. Lexington and Concord turned protest into war.
Thousands of militia surrounded Boston.
British troops held the city, but the countryside no longer obeyed them.
In Philadelphia, resistance became organized.
A new armor was born before a new nation existed. This chaos is unacceptable. We must impose order immediately. They lacked uniforms, training, supplies, and discipline.
Their enemy was one of the most professional armies in the world. On the hills above Boston, colonial fighters prepared a dangerous stand. British commanders decided to attack directly.
The attack showed both British courage and colonial determination. Ammunition was scarce, so every shot had to matter.
The British took the hill, but at a terrible cost. The colonies lost the ground, but gained confidence. In London, the rebellion began to look far more serious. A new commander arrived to turn militia into an army. Discipline became as important as courage.
The army was constantly short of powder, clothing, food, and money.
The siege of Boston became a test of patience. Inside Boston, British troops waited under pressure. Heavy cannon were dragged through winter to change the siege. On Dorchester Heights, the rebels placed cannon above Boston. The British position suddenly became dangerous.
In March 1776, British forces evacuated Boston. For the first time, the rebels had forced the Empire to leave a major city. But the war was not over. It was about to become larger. The British returned with a massive force aimed at New York. New York was divided, crowded, and vulnerable. The Continental Army prepared to defend a city it could barely hold. Britain planned to crush the rebellion with professional force. Britain also hired German troops, known in America as Hessians. To colonists, foreign soldiers made the empire seem even more threatening.
Then a pamphlet turned frustration into a demand for independence.
Common sense argued that monarchy itself was the problem.
Independence moved from radical idea to public conversation. In Philadelphia, debate turned toward the unthinkable: separation from Britain. Words now had to do what armies could not: define a cause. The Declaration spoke of rights, equality, consent, and rebellion against tyranny. But its promises did not belong equally to everyone.
Native nations saw the conflict through their own struggle for survival and land.
When independence was declared, the rebellion became a revolution.
But declaring independence was easier than defending it. The largest British expedition of the war waited offshore. The Continental Army faced professionals, warships, and overwhelming numbers. The British landing was disciplined, massive, and terrifying to watch.
Hessian troops added another layer of fear to the invasion. The rebel command struggled to understand where the main blow would fall. A flanking maneuver threatened to trap the Continental Army.
The rebels were outmatched and nearly destroyed.
A night retreat saved the army from disaster.
The revolution survived because the army escaped.
Britain won the field, but not the war.
New York became the British base for the rest of the conflict. The rebel army retreated again and again. The army survived partly because civilians chose to help it.
At Trenton, Hessian troops settled into winter quarters. The revolution was close to collapse. Then came a desperate gamble across the Delaware. Cold, exhaustion, and fear nearly stopped the crossing.
But the army kept moving.
At Trenton, surprise turned desperation into victory. The victory was small in scale, but enormous in meaning.
For the first time in months, the revolution had momentum.
Days later, another bold move struck at Princeton. The British were reminded that the rebels could still fight. British commanders held cities, but struggled to control the countryside. Militia warfare made occupation difficult and dangerous. Every road could hide resistance.
Still, the Continental Army remained fragile. The revolution needed money, weapons, and foreign support. Across the Atlantic, France watched for signs that the rebellion could survive.
Britain planned to cut New England away from the other colonies. The Northern Campaign would pull many peoples into the war. Native nations faced impossible choices in a war that threatened their lands. The British Northern Army moved slowly through wilderness and resistance. Militia gathered in growing numbers.
At Saratoga, the British advance began to slow. The fighting was hard, confused, and shaped by forests and fields.
The British Army found itself surrounded and short of supplies. At Saratoga, a British army surrendered. The victory convinced France that the American cause could survive. French aid transformed the rebellion into an international war. Britain now had to fight not only rebels, but a rival empire. Yet even after Saratoga, the Continental Army suffered through Valley Forge.
Hunger,
disease, and cold tested the army more than bullets.
Training slowly turned endurance into discipline. As the war dragged on, Britain turned south.
British leaders believed loyalists in the South would help restore control.
But the South became a brutal civil war between neighbors.
Loyalist and patriot communities fought for the future of their homes.
For enslaved people, the war raised dangerous hopes of freedom. Some fled to British lines, hoping the Empire would offer liberation.
Others fought for the American cause, even when its promises excluded them.
The Southern War exhausted both sides. Then American and French strategy converged at Yorktown.
French naval power trapped the British by sea.
American and French troops closed in by land. Inside Yorktown, British options disappeared. The siege was methodical, relentless, and decisive. A British army was trapped with no path to victory. At Yorktown, the war's outcome became clear. Victory came not from one army alone, but from alliance. In London, the cost of continuing became harder to defend. Diplomacy finished what war had made possible. Britain recognized the independence of the United States. For many, independence began not with celebration, but with return. For native nations, American victory often meant greater danger. For enslaved people, the Revolution's language of liberty remained painfully unfinished. The war created a country, but also left questions it could not answer. The American Revolution was not simple. It was war, ideology, empire, civil conflict, and survival. America was born from revolution to feude, but the struggle over liberty had only begun.